It was close to midnight when I finally reached the old house. My car's headlights flickered across the worn wooden boards of the porch, casting long shadows on the decaying structure. I hadn't planned on coming here, not tonight. But there was something about the isolation, the darkness, and the promise of absolute silence that had drawn me in. A break from the chaos of my everyday life. The wind whistled through the nearby trees, making the house creak as though it was alive, breathing in time with the air around it. I stepped out of the car, shivering slightly, though it wasn't from the cold. Something felt off. But I brushed it off, convincing myself I was just tired from the long drive. Nothing to worry about, I muttered to myself, grabbing my backpack from the passenger seat. The air was damp, clinging to my skin like a cold hand. The woods surrounding the house were dense and dark, swallowing up any light that dared to escape from my car. I walked up the cracked stone path to the porch, each step feeling heavier than the last. The wooden boards creaked under my weight as I ascended the steps, and I couldn't help but feel as if the house was watching me. Silly thought, reaching for the rusty key hidden under a loose brick in the wall, I twisted it into the lock. The door opened with a low groan, like an old man waking from a deep sleep. "Home sweet home," I said. My voice echoing eerily in the empty hall. The house had belonged to my family for generations, though no one had lived in it for years. It was an old vacation home, nestled deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. My grandfather had spent summers here, but after he passed, the place had been left to decay. I never really knew why we stopped coming. All I knew was that no one in my family liked talking about it. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. The electricity hadn't been restored yet. Great. With a sigh, I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to guide me as I explored the place. Dust coated everything, old furniture covered with white sheets, bookshelves lined with forgotten novels, and paintings that stared down at me with a sense of foreboding. There was one painting in particular, hanging at the end of the hallway, that always gave me chills. It was of a man, tall and gaunt, standing in front of a darkened forest. His eyes seemed to follow me wherever I moved. I turned my back on it and walked into the living room, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet. The room smelled of musty wood and something else, something faintly metallic. I wrinkled my nose but ignored it. I was just being paranoid. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as if it was begging to come in. Part 3. The clock strikes 2 a.m. I settled down on the couch with my phone, trying to distract myself from the unsettling atmosphere. I browsed through social media, the blue light from the screen illuminating my face. Time seemed to slip by unnoticed, the house's deep silence becoming almost oppressive. It wasn't until I glanced at the time that I realized it was nearly 2 a.m. My heart quickened a little, though I wasn't sure why. Something about that time, that exact hour, always made me uneasy. I brushed it off. Superstitions were for children. Thump, I froze. The sound was faint, like something falling upstairs. I waited, straining my ears, but the house was silent again. Probably just the wind, I whispered to myself, though I wasn't convinced. Suddenly, the grandfather clock in the hallway struck 2 a.m. I hadn't even noticed it before, but now the heavy chimes echoed through the house, each toll sending a shiver down my spine. Thump. Thump, there it was again. This time louder. Coming from directly above me. My pulse quickened. "Hello?" I called, standing up and pointing my phone's flashlight toward the ceiling. No answer, of course. Why would there be? Thump, the sound was deliberate now. Slow. Rhythmic. Almost like footsteps. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to dismiss it as an animal, maybe something in the walls. But deep down, I knew better. There was something else in the house with me. Summoning what little courage I had, I walked toward the stairs, the wooden steps groaning under my feet. I hesitated at the bottom, looking up into the darkness. The flashlight beam from my phone barely penetrated the thick shadows, making the upper floor look more like a black hole than a hallway. "I'm just going to take a look," I said aloud, as if speaking would somehow make the fear go away. It didn't. Each step creaked louder than the last as I climbed the stairs. The air felt heavier up here, thick with dust and the scent of damp wood. My heart was hammering in my chest now, and every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to leave this place and never come back, but I had to know. I reached the top of the stairs, and the hallway stretched out before me like a tunnel of darkness. The door to the master bedroom was slightly ajar, and I was sure that's where the sound had come from. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges letting out a long, drawn-out creak. The room was empty, just like the rest of the house. But something felt wrong. The air was colder here, and the metallic smell was stronger. Then I saw it. In the corner, by the window. A figure, standing deathly still, cloaked in shadow. My heart stopped. I could barely make out its shape, but it was tall, too tall to be human. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. No response. I took a step forward, and the figure seemed to shift slightly, as if it was watching me. My phone's light flickered and then went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. Panic surged through me. I fumbled with the phone, trying to get the flashlight to turn back on. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. When the light finally returned, the figure was gone. I stood frozen in place, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The room was empty again, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. Something had been there. Thump. This time, it came from behind me. I spun around, shining the light down the hallway. Nothing. The house had gone completely silent again, as if it was holding its breath. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my ears, and then, from the darkness, a voice, "You shouldn't be here." My blood turned to ice at the sound of the voice, low and raspy, like someone was struggling to breathe. I swung the phone's flashlight around wildly, searching for the source, but there was no one. Just the empty hallway stretching out before me. "Who's there?" I called out again, my voice barely more than a whisper now. The oppressive silence that followed was worse than the voice itself. My legs felt like they were locked in place, as if something was holding me back from running. My skin prickled with the sensation that I wasn't alone. "You shouldn't be here." The voice came again, this time closer, right behind me. I spun around, phone held out like a shield, but there was still no one. Just the endless darkness, swallowing up the faint beam of light from my phone. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. I needed to get out of here. I bolted down the stairs, not caring about the noise anymore. Each step was accompanied by the creaking groans of the old wood, and I could swear I heard footsteps echoing mine. Faster, heavier, I reached the front door and grabbed the handle, yanking it hard, but it didn't budge. Panic surged in my chest. I twisted the lock frantically, but it was stuck, rusted into place. "Let me out!" I screamed, my voice bouncing off the walls. The house seemed to tighten around me, its very structure closing in. Thump. 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 The footsteps were right above me now, moving toward the stairs. Slow, deliberate, like whoever, or whatever it was, knew I couldn't escape. With shaking hands, I fumbled in my backpack for the spare key. Maybe I could try the back door. As I shoved my hand into the bag, my fingers brushed against cold metal, but something else was in there too, something soft. I froze, pulling my hand out slowly, a tuft of hair. Dark, matted, and soaked in something wet. I dropped it, bile rising in my throat. That wasn't in there before. My heart was racing as I backed away from the door, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I felt like I was being watched. The feeling grew stronger, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. "You shouldn't have come back." The voice whispered again, sending a cold wave of dread through me. This time, it wasn't behind me. It was inside my head. I stumbled back into the living room, my mind racing. The house, this place, it wasn't just haunted. It was alive, feeding off my fear, twisting reality around me. I collapsed onto the old couch, my body trembling, as memories I had long buried started to resurface. I hadn't been here in years. Not since that night, long ago, when I was just a kid. I had blocked it out, forgotten it like a bad dream, but now, it all came rushing back. It was late at night, just like tonight, when my family had rushed out of the house. I remember my mother, pale and terrified, shouting at my father to hurry. I didn't understand what was happening at the time. They wouldn't tell me. But I remember the fear in their eyes. Something had happened after 2 a.m., and whatever it was, they never talked about it again, until now. A sudden crash jolted me from my thoughts. I looked up, shining my flashlight toward the noise. The old grandfather clock in the hallway had fallen over, its glass face shattered across the floor. The hands were frozen at 2 a.m. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out, hoping for a message, something to ground me in reality. But there was no notification, no missed call. Just one new message on the screen: "It's too late." I stared at the words, my heart racing. I hadn't heard the phone ring. I hadn't seen anyone outside. How, before I could even process what I was reading, the phone screen glitched. Lines of static raced across the display, and then it shut off completely, plunging the room back into darkness. Damn it. I cursed, tapping the power button, but it was useless. The phone was dead. My breath came in shallow gasps as I listened, straining my ears for any sound in the silence that had settled over the house. But it was too quiet. The kind of quiet that felt unnatural, like the air itself was holding its breath. And then, out of nowhere, the voice spoke again, clearer this time: "I'm waiting." It was coming from the stairs, that deep, rasping tone that made my skin crawl. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, too terrified to move. Slowly, almost against my will, I turned toward the staircase. The shadows seemed thicker there, darker, as if they were alive. And at the top of the stairs, barely visible in the dim light, I saw it again, the figure, tall, impossibly tall, its head almost brushing the ceiling. It was watching me, motionless, as if waiting for me to make the next move. But there was something new this time. Its face, or what should have been a face, was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its gaze piercing through me. I could feel its hunger. Suddenly, it moved. Not fast, but deliberate, one step at a time, coming down the stairs. Each step it took echoed through the house, the sound of its heavy boots thumping against the old wood. I backed up slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. My body screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The door was still locked. I was trapped. The figure reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. It stood there, shrouded in darkness, its presence looming over me. My breath caught in my throat as I waited for it to make the next move. Then, with a slow, creaking motion, it raised one arm and pointed directly at me. "You shouldn't have come back." That was all I needed. I turned and bolted for the back door, the sound of my own footsteps mixing with the pounding in my ears. I could hear it following me, the sound of its boots heavy and deliberate, like it was toying with me. It could have caught me if it wanted to, but it didn't. It wanted me to feel the terror, to stretch this moment out. I reached the back door, fumbling with the lock. My hands were slick with sweat, shaking so badly I could barely hold on to the key. I glanced over my shoulder, and there it was, standing in the middle of the living room, watching me, its head tilted slightly, as if it was curious, amused even, by my futile attempts to escape. Finally, the key turned, and I yanked the door open, stumbling out into the cold night air. The wind hit me like a slap to the face, but I didn't care. I ran, crashing through the overgrown yard and into the woods, branches whipping at my face and arms as I sprinted blindly through the trees, but no matter how far I ran, I could still hear it. The footsteps. Slow. Steady. Always just behind me, like it was never more than a step away. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I knew I wouldn't survive. Cold night air bit at my face as I crashed through the dense underbrush, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from that thing. My chest was burning, legs screaming for me to stop, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. The footsteps behind me never quickened, but they never faded either. They were always there, steady, relentless, as if the figure was savoring my panic. Branches scratched at my skin, tearing into my clothes as I stumbled deeper into the woods. My phone was dead, my flashlight long gone. The moon barely lit the path ahead, casting long, twisted shadows that played tricks on my mind. Everything seemed to be moving around me, the darkness alive with whispering voices and fleeting figures at the edge of my vision. "You can't escape," the voice echoed in my head, cold and final. My mind was screaming at me to wake up, to break free from this nightmare, but I knew deep down this was no dream. This was real. And I was being hunted. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way. I tripped, falling hard onto my side, the impact knocking the wind from my lungs. I gasped for air, rolling onto my back as the world spun around me. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my ragged breathing and the distant rustle of the trees in the wind. Then I heard it. The slow, deliberate crunch of leaves underfoot. It was close, too close. I forced myself to sit up, every muscle in my body aching. The figure had stopped just at the edge of the tree line, its shape barely visible in the pale moonlight. It didn't move. It didn't need to. It knew I was trapped. "You can't run forever," it whispered, the words seeping into my mind like poison. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing. I didn't know where to go. There was no clear path, no road. No escape. But I had to keep moving. As I turned to run again, something cold wrapped around my ankle. I looked down in horror. Vines, thick, black, and twisted, were curling up from the ground, wrapping themselves around my legs, pulling me down. I kicked and struggled, but the more I fought, the tighter they held on. From behind me, the figure began to move again. Slow, deliberate footsteps. One at a time. It was coming for me. "No, no, no!" I screamed, clawing at the dirt, trying to free myself, but it was no use. The vines were relentless, pulling me deeper into the ground. My body was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't scream anymore. I couldn't move. The figure loomed over me now, its face, or what passed for a face, hidden in the darkness. It crouched down slowly, bringing its head level with mine. For the first time, I could feel its breath, cold, like death itself, against my skin. "You shouldn't have come back," it whispered again, its voice like nails on a chalkboard, scraping against the inside of my skull. Its hand reached out toward me, long, bony fingers tipped with sharp, black nails. As it touched my face, a wave of icy cold spread through my body, and everything went dark. When I woke, I was no longer in the woods. I was lying in the middle of the living room floor, the cold, musty scent of the house filling my lungs. The old grandfather clock was still toppled over, its shattered glass reflecting the pale moonlight filtering through the window, but something was different. The air felt heavier, darker. The house was no longer just a house, it felt like a prison. And I was its prisoner. I pushed myself up slowly, every bone in my body aching. My mind was foggy, my thoughts scrambled, but one memory floated to the surface. A memory I had buried long ago. I was 8 years old. It was summer. My family had come to the house for vacation, as we always did, but something had gone wrong. I remember waking up one night, long after everyone else had gone to bed. The house was dark, and I had wandered downstairs, drawn by a sound I couldn't place. When I reached the living room, I saw him, the man from the painting. He was standing in the doorway, watching me with those hollow eyes. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood there, frozen in place as he walked toward me. He had reached out, just like tonight, and touched my face. That same icy cold spread through me, and I remember blacking out. The next morning, my parents were frantic. packing up the car, telling me we had to leave immediately. They never explained why, but I knew. Even as a child, I knew that was the last time we came here. Until now, I stood up, my legs shaky, and looked around. The house was still silent, but I could feel its presence all around me, watching, waiting. I knew what I had to do. I had to end this. Once and for all, I made my way to the basement. The door was old and warped, and it groaned as I pulled it open. The stairs were steep and narrow, leading down into the pitch-black void below. My phone was still dead, but I didn't need it. Somehow, I knew what I was looking for. The air grew colder as I descended, and that metallic smell returned, stronger now. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement opened up into a small, cramped space, filled with old furniture and boxes covered in dust. And in the corner, hidden behind a pile of rotting wood, was an old, rusted door. My heart raced as I approached it. This was it. This was where it had all started. With trembling hands, I pulled the door open. The air inside was thick, choking, but I stepped through, into the darkness. The room on the other side was small, barely big enough for me to stand in. And there, in the center of the room, was a mirror. It was cracked, the surface covered in grime, but as I stepped closer, I saw my reflection, except it wasn't my reflection. The figure in the mirror wasn't me. It was him, the tall, gaunt man from the painting, his hollow eyes staring back at me, his bony fingers reaching out. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. It had been him all along. I wasn't just being haunted, I had become part of him. Part of this house. Suddenly, the mirror cracked, a loud, piercing sound that echoed through the small room. And in that moment, I understood, this was never about the house. This was about me. I had brought this with me, carried it with me all these years, and now it had claimed me. I don't know how long I've been here now. Time doesn't work the same way anymore. The clock in the living room is still frozen at 2 a.m., the same moment it all began. I can't leave. I'm part of this place now, just like the others. I hear them sometimes, the ones who came before me. Their voices whisper through the walls, calling out for help, but no one ever comes. And now, when the clock strikes 2 a.m., I hear the footsteps again. Slow, deliberate. Coming down the stairs, looking for the next one, but this time, I'm the one waiting.